It is not an accident that this question reached you, and it is not an accident that it asks you to stop thinking before you answer it. Because the moment you begin to analyze, you step away from what this experience is actually about. So just for a moment, don't think. In front of you, imagine foxes. Not as animals in a documentary, not as symbols yet, not as meanings you need to decode. Simply foxes, alert, quiet, watching, moving when necessary, disappearing when it's wise. Notice which fox draws your attention first. Don't justify it. Don't explain it. Don't look for the clever answer. That first pull matters more than any conclusion you could reach afterward. Alan Watts often pointed out that intelligence, in its most natural form, does not announce itself. It doesn't argue, it doesn't over-explain, it responds. And the fox has always represented this kind of intelligence. Not loud, not dominant, but exquisitely aware. The fox survives not by force but by timing, not by control but by sensitivity, not by overpowering the world but by understanding how the world moves. That is why this works. You are not choosing a fox. You are noticing a pattern of awareness already operating inside you. The thinking mind wants clarity, labels, and certainty. It wants to know what this means before it allows itself to feel anything. But as Alan Watts reminded us, the intellect is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. When it takes over too early, it blocks insight instead of creating it. The fox doesn't plan 10 moves ahead out of anxiety. It pays attention. And attention, when it is relaxed and precise, becomes intelligence. As you observe the fox that chose you, you might feel curiosity, recognition, tension, or even distrust. That reaction is not accidental. Sometimes we are drawn to what reflects us clearly. Other times we are drawn to what exposes a strategy we've been using without realizing it. The fox is closely tied to the ego, but not the ego we usually talk about. Not the loud, defensive ego that needs approval and control. The fox represents the subtle ego, the self-image that adapts, negotiates, hides, reveals, and survives by being just clever enough. This kind of intelligence is deeply human. We learn early how to read rooms, adjust our tone, say the right thing, avoid danger, protect our image. None of this is wrong. It is survival. But when this adaptive intelligence runs unconsciously, it can quietly take over our entire sense of self. Alan Watts spoke often about how the ego believes it is the doer, the thinker, the controller of life. But in reality, it is more like a strategy, a pattern that formed to keep things manageable. The fox appears when awareness is sharp, but trust is still cautious. It asks an uncomfortable question. Are you living intelligently or strategically? There is a difference. Strategic living is always watching for threats, always adjusting, always staying one step ahead. It looks like wisdom on the surface, but underneath, it often hides tension, a subtle fear of being exposed, caught, or overwhelmed. Intelligent living, in the deeper sense Alan Watts spoke of, comes from participation rather than defense. It responds to life instead of trying to outsmart it. The fox you noticed may reflect how you currently relate to this balance. Some people feel proud of their cleverness, others feel tired of it. Some sense that they've been surviving beautifully, but not resting. Thinking constantly, but rarely being present. This experience is not here to judge that. It is here to make it visible. Before we go further, stay with the image. Let the fox remain exactly as it is. Don't push it toward meaning yet. Meaning will come later, naturally, when resistance softens. And if you feel the impulse to acknowledge what's happening, leave a comment with this simple sentence. I noticed the fox before I explained it. Not as a performance, as an observation. And if you want to continue exploring these questions, not as self-improvement but as self-awareness, subscribe and stay with us. In the next part, we will look more closely at how intelligence becomes ego, how ego becomes survival, and how survival quietly shapes the way we move through the world. For now, don't rush. Let the fox watch. Let yourself be watched. If you stay with the image long enough, you may begin to notice something subtle about the fox. It is not tense, but it is alert. Not anxious, but aware. The fox does not rush into action, yet it is never asleep. This quality reveals something essential about the way intelligence often appears in human life. Alan Watts frequently spoke about how we confuse intelligence with constant thinking. We assume that to be intelligent is to always be calculating, planning, anticipating. But real intelligence, he said, is closer to listening than to controlling. It is the ability to respond appropriately without forcing reality into a rigid plan. The fox embodies this perfectly. If the fox that chose you felt observant, cautious, always reading the environment, this reflects a form of intelligence shaped by experience. You've learned, consciously or unconsciously, that the world is unpredictable, that situations shift quickly, that safety often comes from noticing what others miss. This kind of awareness is not wrong, it is adaptive. It helps you survive complex social spaces, emotional dynamics, and uncertain environments. You sense tone, intention, and timing before words fully land. You know when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to reveal and when to disappear. But here is where intelligence quietly turns into ego. When awareness becomes constant self-monitoring, when sensitivity becomes vigilance, when adaptation becomes identity. Alan Watts pointed out that the ego is not an enemy. It is a tool, a useful strategy for navigating the world. But problems arise when we forget that it is a strategy and start believing it is who we are. The fox survives by being clever. The human ego survives by being someone. If the fox that drew you in felt strategic, almost calculating, there may be a subtle exhaustion beneath your intelligence. Not physical tiredness, but mental tension. The sense that you are always one step ahead, yet rarely at ease. Always prepared, yet rarely present. You may notice this in moments of silence. When nothing demands your attention, the mind still scans, still plans, still adjusts, as if rest itself were unsafe. Alan Watts often smiled at this irony. The very intelligence that protects us can become the thing that prevents us from relaxing into life. There is another way the fox appears. Sometimes the fox feels playful, curious, light on its feet, not hiding out of fear, but moving because movement itself is enjoyable. This reflects a different relationship with intelligence, one that trusts spontaneity. When intelligence is playful, ego loosens. You adapt without anxiety. You respond without rehearsing. You don't need to be ahead, only present. This is intelligence that flows rather than calculates. The question is not which version is better. The question is which one is currently leading you. Alan Watts warned us about living entirely from survival mode while calling it wisdom. Survival mode narrows awareness. It keeps life small, manageable, predictable. It avoids risk, but it also avoids depth. The fox asks you to notice something gently but honestly. Are you living intelligently or defensively? Defensive intelligence is always bracing for impact. Responsive intelligence is open, flexible, alive. Neither is immoral, but only one allows life to feel spacious. As you reflect, you may recognize moments where your cleverness protected you and moments where it isolated you, where being sharp kept you safe and where it kept you distant, where strategy helped you survive and where it stopped you from fully participating. Alan Watts reminded us that the universe is not a hostile place to be outsmarted. It is a dance, and the moment you believe you must always be on guard, you stop dancing and start guarding the floor. The fox is not asking you to abandon intelligence. It is asking you to soften your grip on it, to notice when awareness has turned into tension, to see when cleverness has replaced trust. If this reflection resonates, leave a comment with this simple sentence: I'm noticing when intelligence turns into tension, and if these ideas help you see yourself with more clarity and less self-judgment, subscribe and stay with us. In the next part, we will explore how survival shapes identity itself and what happens when the fox no longer needs to hide. For now, let the fox remain alert but relaxed, watching, not guarding. At a certain point, if you stay with this reflection long enough, the fox stops feeling like a symbol and starts feeling like a pattern, not something you observe from the outside, but something you recognize from within. This is where the conversation deepens, because now we are no longer talking about intelligence as an ability, but intelligence as identity. Alan Watts often spoke about how easily the ego mistakes its function for its essence. The ego begins as a practical tool, a way to navigate the world, to communicate, to survive. But over time, it quietly claims ownership of the whole experience. It says, "This is who you are." And once that happens, survival stops being a response to danger and becomes a permanent posture. The fox lives by awareness, but it does not cling to it. It does not say, "I must always be alert." It simply is. Humans, however, tend to turn awareness into effort. We grip it, we maintain it. We exhaust ourselves trying to stay sharp. If the fox that chose you felt watchful, cautious, always scanning, this may reflect a life shaped by unpredictability. You learned early, through people, environments, or emotional experiences, that safety was not guaranteed. So intelligence became armor. Reading situations quickly became protection. Anticipation became control. This is not weakness, it is adaptation. But adaptation, when left unquestioned, becomes identity. You may notice this in relationships. You sense shifts before others do. You read between lines, you anticipate reactions. But instead of feeling connected, you often feel one step removed, as if you are observing life rather than fully inside it. Alan Watts pointed out that the ego's deepest fear is not pain, but loss of control. And so it creates strategies, roles, personas, ways of being that seem intelligent and functional, yet subtly restrict spontaneity. The fox can disappear when threatened. The ego disappears by becoming someone acceptable. Over time, survival becomes performance. You don't just adapt, you manage impressions. You don't just respond, you calculate outcomes. And without realizing it, the natural flow of intelligence turns into a constant self-reference loop. This is where many people feel a quiet dissatisfaction they cannot name. On the surface, life works. You function, you cope, you succeed in being competent. But something feels tight, as if life is always being handled, never trusted. Alan Watts would say that this is what happens when the mask forgets it is a mask. The fox does not believe it is clever, it simply moves cleverly when needed. Humans, on the other hand, often build their sense of worth around being smart, capable, adaptive, resilient. And the moment this identity is threatened, by uncertainty, by not knowing, by vulnerability, tension arises. This is where survival mode quietly becomes suffering. Not because danger is present, but because danger is anticipated. The fox invites a radical shift in perspective. What if intelligence is not something you need to maintain? What if awareness does not require constant vigilance? What if the world does not need to be outmaneuvered? Alan Watts reminded us that the universe is not a trap set for the unwary. It is not an enemy system waiting for mistakes. It is a living process, and you are part of it, not separate from it. When this is seen even briefly, the ego loosens its grip. You stop trying to stay ahead of life and begin to move with it. Intelligence returns to its natural state, responsive, flexible, alive. You may notice moments where your cleverness relaxes, where you don't plan your response, where you speak without rehearsal, where you allow yourself to not know. These moments are not failures of intelligence. They are expressions of deeper trust. The fox does not disappear here. It changes posture, from hiding to observing, from guarding to participating. If this resonates, leave a comment with this simple sentence: "I'm noticing when survival becomes identity." And if these reflections help you loosen the grip of constant self-management, subscribe and stay with us. In the final part, we will explore what happens when intelligence no longer serves survival, but play, presence, and freedom. For now, stay with this question quietly. What would change if you didn't need to be clever all the time? At this point, the fox no longer feels like something you chose. It feels more like something that revealed itself, and that subtle shift matters, because it shows that the question was never really about the fox at all. It was about how you meet life when no one is watching. Alan Watts often reminded us that the greatest illusion of the ego is the belief that it is in charge, that it is the thinker behind thoughts, the doer behind actions, the controller of outcomes. But when you look closely, this sense of control is mostly a story told after the fact. Life happens first. The explanation comes later. The fox understands this instinctively. It does not over-identify with its intelligence. It uses it when needed and releases it when the moment passes. There is no pride in cleverness, no attachment to strategy, no anxiety about maintaining an image. Intelligence remains fluid, situational, alive. Human beings, however, often turn intelligence into a role. We begin to believe that being sharp, prepared, adaptive is who we are, not simply something we do. And once that happens, rest feels dangerous. Not knowing feels irresponsible. Letting go feels like losing ourselves. This is where survival quietly becomes a way of life. You may notice this in how difficult it can be to relax without distraction, how silence invites the mind to start scanning again, how moments of openness are quickly filled with plans, judgments, or self-commentary, as if awareness itself were unsafe unless it is busy. Alan Watts would say that this is the ego trying to protect an imaginary boundary, a sense of me that feels separate from the flow of life and therefore must constantly defend itself. The fox appears here as a mirror, not to shame your strategies, not to tell you to abandon intelligence, but to ask whether intelligence is still serving life or quietly constraining it. There is a profound difference between being aware and being on guard, between responsiveness and vigilance, between intelligence that listens and intelligence that manages. When intelligence relaxes, something unexpected happens. You don't become careless, you become present. Actions still occur, decisions are still made, but they arise from participation rather than calculation. Alan Watts spoke beautifully about this when he said that life is more like music than mathematics. You don't listen to a song by trying to predict the next note. You listen by being with it as it unfolds. The fox moves this way, step by step, moment by moment, not ahead of itself. When you see this, even briefly, survival loosens its grip. The need to stay one step ahead softens. You allow yourself to be surprised, to respond instead of preempt, to trust that awareness does not disappear when control is released. This does not mean danger vanishes. It means danger is no longer imagined everywhere. You may begin to notice small shifts. You pause before reacting. You listen without rehearsing your reply. You allow yourself to not know what comes next. These moments may feel unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable, because they interrupt a long-standing habit of self-protection. But they also feel lighter. The fox is still there, still intelligent, still perceptive, but no longer hiding, no longer tense, no longer mistaking survival for identity. And perhaps that is the quiet realization this experience points toward. You are not your strategies. You are not your cleverness. You are not the constant effort to stay safe. You are the awareness in which all of that appears and dissolves. If you feel this recognition resonate, leave a comment with this simple sentence: I'm learning when to be clever and when to be present, not as a goal, as an observation. And if these reflections help you relate to yourself with less tension and more curiosity, subscribe and stay with us, not to find answers, but to keep questioning in a way that feels alive rather than exhausting. Because the fox never asked you to outsmart life. It invited you to notice when you stopped trusting it. And when that trust returns, intelligence becomes what it was always meant to be. Not a defense against living, but a way of dancing with it. That is where survival ends and participation begins.